Have you ever wondered how salespeople are paid? More importantly, how sales compensation programs are constructed? It really shouldn't be that difficult. If you just think about it, the salesperson sells the product, the revenue is then registered at the company, and then you pay the salesperson a portion of that revenue. Yeah, that's kind of the underlying principle of sales compensation, but it gets a lot more complicated. So what do you measure on? Revenue or new revenue or renewals? Do you pay major account managers and territory reps the same way? What about people who are working retail or others that are maybe working with channel partners? And what about quotas? What's the purpose of them and why do you use them and how does that affect pay? And what about credit splits and other things having to do with getting awarded for the sale? So those are a lot of interesting questions and it get fairly complicated. So what this program is a way for you to learn about sales compensation. It's an introduction. So our title is How Sales Compensation Works, an Introduction. And really what it is, it's a checklist, a synopsis of the key topics in sales compensation design. So you may be in finance or sales operations or sales management or HR, and you've been tasked with helping improve the sales compensation program, maybe even update it for the next fiscal year. Well, this video will give you a quick education about the topics you should be paying attention to. Now, of course, it's not an in-depth course that actually explains how to do all the calculations and the formulas and all the choices that you have. There are good resources available for that, but it kind of gives you a introduction, a way of learning about the subject, and maybe a mental checklist. Now, for those of you who do this on a regular basis, many of these topics will sound familiar with you, and you should use this video as a sort of recap of what you know and just really confirming again some of the things that are important when actually designing sales compensation programs. Sales compensation is a wonderful tool, management tool. It's very effective. It's proven its worth over and over again. They work if they're designed well. So I'm Dave Cicchelli with the Alexander Group, and I have a focus in this particular area, so I get a chance to work with local and global sales organizations, helping them redesign their sales coverage models. And then I act as our practice leader at the Alexander Group here in sales compensation. And I've written a number of books that you might find of interest. I think the one, particularly in this particular subject, is the book in the middle, Compensating the Sales Force, 3rd edition. So all the things I'm going to be talking about are dealt in much greater detail in that particular book, okay? And so I'm glad you're here. You'll find it very interesting, hopefully some entertaining too. And it's a great subject. It's a great, powerful management device. Sales reps want to do well. They want to perform well. Management wants to reward them for their outstanding performance. It's a win-win. But the important thing is making sure we design them correctly, okay? And that's what our session is going to be, How Sales Compensation Works, an introduction. So here's our topics. Of course, we're going to talk about 8 important things. First of all, we're going to talk about getting strategic alignment. Then we'll talk about coverage and segmentation. We'll talk about how to charter sales jobs and how to look for where you're going to compensate and how you're going to compensate. We're going to do a quick introduction of sales compensation principles. They're like the building codes of sales compensation design. They're universal too. We're going to suggest a methodology for designing your compensation programs. And remember, every year, sales departments look at their sales compensation programs to make sure they're in alignment with the strategy of the company going forward. We're going to talk a little bit about a design formula and then how to communicate. And then we'll also mention some data sources for you, survey data sources, and also automation vendors, people that provide tools for actually automating the sales comp calculation process. So with that, let's get started. Okay, well, first of all, what drives sellers? Okay, is it all about pay? Well, it's only one factor, and that's kind of the first 2 things I want to share with you. Is even though we're going to be talking about sales compensation, salespeople are very complex people, just like you are. It's not just pay that motivates them. Of course, the pay is important, and it's in a very visible reward system, but there's a lot of other things that causes great performance. At the top of the list is leadership. So sales leadership, providing a sense of direction, a mission, a communications to the sales organization about what role they're playing and why it's important for the corporation. There can be no more powerful motivator and communicator than the leader standing forward saying, this is why you're here, this is what we want you to accomplish. It gives people a sense of identity, okay? Now, accountability, these are other types of measures that are not part of the compensation program. And actually, first-line supervisors spend a lot of time tracking what sales reps are doing. They do pipeline measurement, deals outstanding. There's a whole variety of activities in terms of measuring salespeople and how they're performing that don't necessarily appear in the compensation program, and sales representatives get regular reports of how they're performing against quota and how they're doing with campaigns. And so they are receiving a lot of information, and just like you are, they are responding to anything they're being held accountable for. It's in their nature to want to perform well, and these other accountability measures are ways of informing them that there's additional things that they're focusing on and making sure they're accomplishing those things. Okay, well that then brings us to the next thing, and that's personal accomplishment. So remember, you're motivated to do well, you have personal ambitions, well so do salespeople. And they will perform because they want to perform. They have a desire to succeed, they have a desire to contribute, they have a desire to be recognized for their performance. And so personal accomplishment, part of the team, reviewing how you're doing with your sales team members, it's all part of being connected, being engaged with the sales organization. And then finally, we have remuneration. And we, of course, have cash programs such as our base salary. And then we have our security programs, the benefit programs, and things like that. And then we have incentives. And there's a bunch of categories in incentives. Remember, incentive is a additional reward for additional effort. So we have sales compensation. We also have contests and spiffs, and also national recognition programs too. Those are all types of forms of remuneration or incentives. So this particular, obviously, video is only going to deal with the one at the bottom, incentives, which means do not diminish the importance of the other activities. They're just as, if not greater importance. So where does sales comp fit in the intensity of performance accountability? Remember, the sales organization is being measured all the time. So a salesperson, and if you're not familiar with the world of salespeople, they're working continuously in what's called their sales funnel progression. They have a series of deals. They're putting them into their CRM system. Their bosses are asking them about how's things going, where's the next step for this particular. It's a day in and day out discussion that sales reps are following it themselves, making sure that they're keeping in contact with their clients and customers, moving the decision process forward. That's the number one thing that's morning and night. That's what salespeople are thinking about, is moving it forward to a final close. Of course, then we have the performance reporting systems, and those are things like, which I described before, these accomplishments, these measurement systems that kind of describe how well you're doing against goal, objectives, various indices, okay? And then finally, then the next one, which would be supervisory oversight, and that kind of contributes to the boss says, well, how you doing, Dave? How's the sales occurring with XYZ company? Where do we stand with them? And then we have sales compensation. So why did I mention these others first? Because these others actually have a bigger impact on the salesperson's psyche and motivation. So sales compensation is important, but it's not on top of the pyramid in terms of what salespeople are focused on and why they pay attention to performing well. Pay is super important. Now we have a number of other factors that influence a salesperson, membership and engagement, that's our team, and then appraisal, most companies have an annual appraisal program, and then finally the opportunity maybe to be promoted and move up the ranks. All of these are factors that are affecting the sales compensation program. And what the previous chart and this chart is saying is, remember, sales compensation is one part of a huge array of things that are used in the management cycle for salespeople. But sales compensation is super important. And by the way, if you get it wrong and if you measure it incorrectly or you don't pay when you're supposed to pay, it becomes a huge distraction. So let's talk about making sure that we're designing great sales compensation programs. So with that, let's take a look at, first of all, get strategic alignment. Well, what does that mean? So alignment, and the opposite word is, I would say, misalignment or obsolescence. This is making sure that what the objectives of the company are can actually be seen in the sales compensation program. But of course, it translates through a whole bunch of steps. Let's just take a look at this. For example, sales compensation is connected. So the strategic intent is sales and profit objective. That's at the top. And then at the bottom, we got our compensation program that is actually making sure there's alignment. You know, you can just kind of look straight up and see, oh yeah, the compensation program is rewarding me for the important objectives that we have this year. Now you might say, well, why would the sales or profit objectives even change? Well, they change frequently. One year we might be focused on growing revenue, and the next year we might be focused on growing revenue from existing customers, or maybe the year after that getting new customers, or it might be selling additional products to existing customers. So these shifts in where the focus is usually is occurring on an annual basis. Now, as you can see, that then translates, and if you're a sales leader, you're then asking the question, okay, so which segments do we have, and who's going to call on those segments, and then what type of people do we need, and then we have the jobs that we need to make sure that are functioning correctly, so major account job and territory rep. And then I got to make sure the talent, the people, have the skills to deliver the messages. And then I need to have a sales process that they follow on a regular basis. And then I have performance management, in which I'm tracking the results. And then some of those results will then eventually translate into the compensation program. So it's a connected, and it's part of a multiple set of processes, and you really can't design a sales compensation program unless you take these into account. Now, why is this chart also kind of important? It tells you that prevalence of practice, what your neighbor is doing down the street and how they pay their sales reps, is not what you're going to follow, because they are making decisions around segments, talent, jobs, skills, processes, and performance measures that are unique to them. Now, of course, you want to get the target pay information from that group of people, but not necessarily their pay plans, okay? Because their pay plans are going to be unique to them. And we have a lot of benchmark data that shows that there's wide variation in the actual design of the compensation program, even within the same industry. Okay, so let's talk about segment for coverage. So what does that mean? So sales organizations are best designed when they are organized around buyer populations. Now, if you think about a little bit about the geometry of this, most companies are organized around product divisions. However, the sales department needs to be organized around buyer populations. And they do a variety of things with those buyer populations. They go find relevant customers, they persuade those customers, and then they fulfill. So if I take a look at this is an example of what's called a coverage map that a sales organization would employ. Now, across the top is a simplified form of sales process. If you actually put that into a Google search and type in sales process, you will see literally hundreds of various sales processes. But generally, they all share these underlying principles along the top here. I got to go find customers. Maybe that's a salesperson doing it. Maybe it's the marketing department doing it. I need to persuade the customer, convince them to purchase something, and then I got to make sure that the customer has it. So what do we mean by segments? Well, on the left-hand side is our segment population. And these are the groupings of customers that you can kind of deliver the same message to. So sales organizations are grouped around buyer populations, not around product divisions. So there's the global accounts, central buy. In other words, it's a big customer, and at their headquarters, they make all the buy decisions. And then we have global accounts, central decide, local buy. Wow, that means I've got a national account job where I have a key account manager calling on the customer, and then I have a local salesperson calling at the same time. I have large accounts, just big, large customers I'm calling on. Then I have my mid-market accounts and my territory accounts and small accounts that are self-serve potentially. So each of them are being the coverage is solving the access, persuade, and fulfill, which creates a lot of jobs, okay? And those jobs have different objectives, and those jobs therefore will have their own unique compensation program. One more word about segmentation. So this particular segmentation, you can hear it's both size and the nature of the buying process. Now, there are many, many flavors of segmentation. We could talk about channel partners. We could talk about industry verticals. We could talk about a variety of other methodologies how customers might buy. There are high-risk products, and then there are low-risk products. So the skill set of designing a sales organization really rests with the competency of being able to ferret out and discover segment populations that you provide value proposition to that are covered by salespeople or some connected device, that then if there's a person involved, then rewarding them for their point of persuasion. So that's why all of a sudden sales compensation starts to take on a degree of complexity, because we have a lot of jobs doing different things with different populations of customers. So let's take a look at some examples. So this would be known as a direct sales job. And I'm just giving you an illustration of where the jobs might come from. So along the top, we have the makers. And these are people that make things, manufacturers, or they may be a service provider, or maybe they're underwriters, but they're the creator of the product. And along the bottom are the buyers, and they could be commercial buyers, industrial commercial buyers, or they could be government buyers, they can even be consumers, okay? And so that on the left-hand side, that means that the manufacturer, direct, has its own salespeople that sells to that population. And it can take on lots and lots of different iterations. Your company would be unique to you if you're selling direct, okay? So this example here, and this is a famous, most common design known as the stratified sales department, which we have the large customers at the top, and then we have the small customers at the bottom, maybe even a consumer population. And then I have these different jobs, global account managers, strategic account, pursuit team. This is a group of sales resources put together temporarily to go after a major deal. I keep asking you the question, how would you compensate them? Okay, how would you compensate a pursuit team? How would you compensate a key account manager? Or about a territory representative? Or what about sales coming through the web? Okay, is that somebody getting compensated for that? That's a good question. And there might be additional jobs making all this work effectively. There might be a business development person. They go out and stimulate business. They don't write an order. They may even refer to a channel, or they are simply an advocate for the product, and the customers then contact their local salesperson. Pre-sales support, these might be engineers or technical people. Product overlay specialists, we've got a salesperson covering a territory, and they need help, technical help with a certain line of product, and so this overlay specialist might be a product specialist, maybe supporting 20 sales reps. Okay, so again, ask the question, how do you compensate product specialists? Or, same way, industry specialists, or installation support people, or customer service, or should they be incented? So that kind of gives you a picture that what happens is that we're taking these business units, we're redividing them into customer populations, and then we're allocating jobs to them, and then that raises the question, okay, so we have a whole management system, sales process, we have supervisory practices, we have reporting systems, and a compensation system, okay. Here's our indirect sellers. Now, there's a lot of content on this page, but let me describe what we have here real briefly. Got the manufacturers again. However, we don't sell directly to the end user. We sell through an intermediary. So the dark oval lines is if you're the manufacturer, those are the people that you have in the field. You might have partner managers, or you might have channel enablers, you might have channel sellers, and you might have category managers. Those are all examples of talent that you might have in your organization. So these are, and there's a huge variety of indirect channels. Again, you're faced with the question, if those are your employees, your product managers, your channel enablers, your channel sellers, your category managers, how are you going to compensate them? Remember, they're not selling to the end user. They're selling to a partner who is then selling to the end user. Now, there we have the partner jobs at the bottom. Full solutions sellers, adoption sellers, choice sellers, purchase assistance folks. Those are all the jobs. And if you happen to be one of the intermediaries, a partner, well, you're going to have the jobs along the bottom. And then the question raises, okay, well, how am I going to compensate those? And just so you can understand what some of these acronyms are, OEM, original equipment manufacturer, VAR, value added reseller. Broker is a person who represents the buyer. They then sell to the buyer when they pick from a variety of vendors, kind of like your insurance broker. They're supposed to shop insurance for you. As you can see, that produces lots and lots of different interaction points between the manufacturer and the buyer. We may then have going through this indirect channel. Okay, all right, next, let's get down in more detail into the sales jobs, because that's the gateway into sales compensation design. So, so the charter sales jobs. So sales jobs are super important to be designed correctly, okay? And then frequently there's a challenge that says, well, the compensation system isn't working. And so you go, okay, well, what's wrong with the compensation system? And frequently, sales compensation systems start to grind to a halt. Well, maybe it's the quota setting system that's bad, or we're not tracking all the sales correctly. That's the administrative system. Or maybe product management has unrealistic objectives for the sales force, or we just didn't communicate well. But let me suggest to you, and this has been our experience, is that over hundreds of projects, we find rampant job design errors. Now, you might say, well, I'm here just to design the formulas. Well, you cannot design the formulas without looking at the jobs themselves, because jobs often become damaged over a period of time. It's not intentional, but it becomes damaged over a period of time. For example, the word corrupted job, not person, the job got corrupted. This would be an example where the salesperson's selling, but there's a whole bunch of service issues. But now they're spending their time on service issues and not on sales. That job's broken. So we've got a broken service function it's backed up into the sales job. That needs to be cleaned up. No compensation system is going to solve, the sales results when you have a job that's spending most of its time on service issues rather than on sales issues. And then the second would be the blended job. Well, we'll have them call on new customers and existing customers. Well, in some sparse geographic areas, that's necessary. You can't support two salespeople, but normally that job is split apart into a hunter and a farmer. Otherwise, the blended job gets hard to operate. Here's another example of blended job. The branch manager, not only are they supervising people, they have their own accounts. Okay, sometimes it's necessary from a cost point of view, but you can hear that, there's competition in the person's head about what should I be spending my time on. Now, raise the question, how are you going to compensate for that, okay? And then we have overloaded jobs. We've just given them too many products and too many buyer populations to call on. Or the job has evolved. You started off as getting new customers. Now we're actually managing existing customers. Well, the pay system that you use for startup or getting customers is actually a different pay system for managing, and that's the account manager plan. I'm not quite sure what these images represent, these people in line down here. Just bear with me a second here. So the usual suspects, are they in line for what? I don't know. For a lineup? Or these are the typical things that it's too funny. And thank you for the young lady's image up here, and she's telling us, no, there really are hidden culprits, and those are job design areas. And most of the time, the sales compensation programs that I work with that are struggling usually have job design mistakes, and those need to be cleaned up. Okay, so here's some tools, like a microscope for looking at a job. Here's a really simple 2x2, and I'm going to walk you through it and set it up, and then I'll show you how to apply it. So first of all, if we take the world and put buyers on one side and products along the bottom, and we divide buyers into two populations. One that are current customers and the other is prospects, and we take products and break them into two populations, current products and new or different products. You can see there are 4 types of selling behaviors. And remember the discussion about blended? Well, this is an example that if you're asking the salesperson to do all these things, I want you to sell current customers new products. I want you to sell new customers new products. So you can see that we have a variety of things that we're asking the salesperson to do. Now, why this is a helpful chart, you can just ask any sales leader or field manager, tell me how the salesperson is spending their time. Which of these 4 buckets are they focused on? Oh, all of them? Okay, well then divide up their time. What time? Oh yeah, and plot the revenue in each of these 4 boxes, and actually plot the profitability. So you can do it by a job, okay? So a job, you might have 300 sales reps, and you can just actually do time measurement and find out where they're spending their time. And if they're spending a lot of time in the lower left-hand corner, they're doing what's called fulfillment selling, okay? You could expect a startup company, would be doing new market selling in the upper right-hand corner. You now know, and you are saying, well, of course, I would pay differently the new market seller than the fulfillment selling. And remember the discussion about blended, whenever you're asking someone to do all these things at the same time, I'm not quite sure how you compensate that job. Total revenue? But where do they spend their time? Where do you want them to spend their time? So moving on, you can see most sales organizations will eventually, as they get larger, not in the beginning, because they're basically doing new account selling. If they're finding they're spending a lot of time doing fulfillment selling, they will then maybe provide some market specialist or product specialist to help sell the new products or get into customers we haven't sold before, or maybe even create a dedicated sales force in the upper right-hand corner. So these are where our jobs come from. So the classic territory rep is usually asked to do all of these things. It's a pretty challenging job. And if you actually measure their time, they seem to be all over the place. Sometimes they're working with existing customers, sometimes they're calling on new customers. You can see the account manager spends most of his or her time in the lower left-hand corner, and new account seller would be along the top. Why am I doing this? Because everything that I have up there, you know, product specialist, dedicated sales team, territory rep, account manager, they all get their own compensation program based upon the performance measures for that job. So where are we? So alignment, what is the company's business objectives? What are we trying to accomplish? Segmentation, you know, how are we grouping the customers for coverage purposes? Jobs, you know, so we have all these different populations of jobs that need to cover the customer base. And then we drill in a little bit further, and what we're hunting for is what's called the point of persuasion. And that's the question that you're going to ask to determine who gets compensated. So one of our principles is that you pay for persuasion. And you can see we have access, persuade, fulfill, and we've given a little bit more breakdown now. You can, obviously there's some further identifications: identify, qualify, access the needs, propose a solution, close, implement the solution, and then retain. So what is the red dot? The red dot is the person who did the persuasion. That's the person that gets sales compensation. Now, you may have a different philosophy. You say, well, it's all one team and I all want people to work together. Okay, that's a whole nother discussion. We're not covering that right now, that sort of group selling behavior. There are instances when you would want to do that, when they're codependent on each other, but these are really kind of standalone jobs. And so easily, you know, we would be paying the sales rep, the generalist rep, a sales incentive. But what about the inside sales and service job? You know, we would probably be paying them an incentive for re-signing people. And then telesales hunter, what are they doing? They're actually not actually selling. They're identifying opportunities. So there really isn't an incentive there. They're just identifying opportunities for the sales force to call on. Okay. So next, you can actually see then you have these coverage models, and we talk about jobs. The classic is in the upper top, you know, the field hunter, account manager job. There might be an engineer supporting it, and maybe a renewal rep. But notice now with the digital selling or digital evolution, we have now a very disintegrated, separated apart process. I meant the word disaggregated sales process, where we have maybe self-learning web program manager, we try and buy program manager, an inside salesperson, we still have our field rep. Each of those creates a series of jobs that has a certain focus that gets rewarded for what they're being asked to do. And that's the essence of sales compensation. So a lot of sales compensation work is about job definition, cleaning them up, making sure they're not corrupted or blended or overloaded or anything like that, and that they're aligned to the segments that they belong in. Without doing those steps, you can probably design a fairly average to below average sales compensation program. But most broken sales compensation programs have some degree of job damage and needs to be clarified through the sales coverage process. Okay, now what about principles? So I use the expression building codes. What about building? What are building codes? So if I look around the room right now that you're in, okay, take a look at the door. Do you know how many inches that door handle is off the ground? Well, if you're in the U.S. and we're using our measurement systems here in inches and feet, that's actually 36 inches off the ground. And the light switch is 42 inches off the ground, and that socket on the wall is 12 inches off the ground. How did I know that? Well, because there's a set of building codes that are followed. You know, they're published locally here. There are a set of building codes that we follow when we're building buildings, okay? Now, when it comes to sales compensation, there's actually a set of building codes, but they operate on a worldwide basis globally, regardless of the industry you're in. Now, there's many subtleties to these principles, and yes, they do allow to be adjusted or bend a little bit to accommodate a company's situation. But if I was sitting at the headquarters of a very large company and I had regions around the world and product divisions around the world with their own sales forces, I would want to make sure that I published the company's sales compensation principles. By them taking the unique nature of the jobs that they have in Tokyo versus the US versus Germany, and pushing them through these principles, I'll come out with a design that's consistent with the job design in that location. The principles don't change, but what might be different is the actual construct of the job itself. So there's lots of different principles, but one of the first things we've got to get clarified on right away is that there are really two different types of sellers. And I want to chat with you about that because it has a very important implication for sales compensation design. So many of you might be thinking there saying, well, wait a minute, what about real estate salespeople or financial advisors or stockbrokers or life insurance people? What about those people? You know, that's not so complicated. Well, good for you. You're describing what's known as a producer. So in the world of sales departments and sellers, there are two types of sellers. One is known as a producer and the other is known as a sales representative. And here are the plan designs that are actually applied to those. The producers are on the left. They get a target rate. They don't have a target compensation amount. They get a percentage of everything they bring in. And producers, one of the characteristics of producers is the company and the salesperson are in business together. Now, yes, of course, they are an employee of the company, but they're basically splitting the revenue or the profit or whatever the measure is that's coming in. And the company provides administrative support and the seller brings their customers and they kind of optimize that. And by the way, they can make a lot of money or they can make little money, okay? So we're not really managing to a target pay. But that commission rate is very well established in that market segment in that country. So now, one of the things about producers is it's unique to the market and it's seldom, the designs seldom change. And again, let's think about those. Those would be things like real estate, life insurance, financial advisors, stockbrokers, collections people. Okay, that's another type of producer type plan. Whereas on the other columns, what we call the sales representative plans, these are people that you hire that's representing your unique value proposition. They participate in two types of incentive programs. So the first being the 3X Uncapped, which is the most popular design for sales representatives. So now watch, make sure you hear the terms. Producer, sales representative. Two types of sellers, producers, sales representatives. So on the target pay side, I'm talking about sales representatives. They're representing your product. And by the way, if they left, they would go work for somebody else to represent their product. If your producer left, they may take their customers with them because the relationship is with the sales representative. And that's where the unique value is. So under the target pay system, the most common design for sales representative is known as the 3X Uncapped design. And I'm going to describe it to you, but I'm going to revisit it in a second. Now, why am I spending some time on this? Because this is some of the underlying geometry and math associated with sales compensation. So 3X Uncapped, what does that mean? Well, let's presume we're going to give you a target pay of $100,000. We've collected survey data, decided to mark your compensation at the $100,000 level, and that's what we want you to earn when you hit quota. That's represented by that line across those two columns. That's the target total compensation, or sometimes referred to as on-target earnings. Okay, then I'm going to split that into two pieces. I'm going to have a base salary component, and I'm going to have an at-risk component, told to the sales reps as their target incentive. Now, what do you mean by the 3X? Well, the upside earning opportunity is 3X the at-risk component. And let me do that math for you. If I take the $100,000 and split it into two pieces, 70-30, I have a $70,000 base and a $30,000 incentive opportunity. The best performers should be able to earn $160,000. How did I get that number? I took the 30 times 3, 90. I added it to the base, 70. That gave me the 160. Now, what that means is the best performers, the top 10%, should be able to earn 160. And in fact, maybe a little bit more. Not a whole lot more, but a little bit more. And that is done when you're building the formulas. You're making sure that the top 10 percentile of performers are earning the 3X. That's one of the most common designs in sales compensation. It's not everywhere. Some companies do 2.5, others do 3.5, but if you look across a great swath of data around the world, it's generally a 3X Uncapped design. The 2X Cap design is used occasionally in sales departments. You would know it most commonly as the management incentive plan. A 2X Cap is usually a design used for the vice presidents outside the sales department I'm describing here. You know, the executives and the directors, maybe even the managers, in which the person is offered a salary, and then they have a bonus opportunity of 30%. And if they do really well, by the end of the year, that 30% can be up to 60%. And they're measured on a couple of things: company performance, division, individual KPIs. but not more than 60%. That's why it's called a 2x cap. And that's really prevalent and used for management incentive program. It's occasionally used in the sales space. For example, pre-support engineers are usually a 2x cap design. Consumer packaged goods generally pay a 2x cap design also. So those are the things that are available to us. Let's take a little bit more detail of that. So remember, income producers, they have a target rate. The value is created by the seller. The account owner is the salesperson. Gosh, if they left, they might take their big accounts with them, their big contacts with them. The basis of pay is revenue. They get a percentage of everything. Real estate, traders, independent agents, multi-level marketers, they're all producers. Whereas sales representatives, which we're going to focus on, have a target pay. We're hiring them to represent our product. The account owner, company is the account owner. And in fact, the salesperson left. They're very unlikely that they will take the business with them. They're going to manage to a target pay. These would be our classic titles of territory rep, account manager, channel manager, and then product specialist. And you can actually see the math behind here. This is how the labor market actually treats these jobs. The income producer is the red line. The more you sell, the more you get paid. But the labor market tends to say to the sales representatives, yeah, keep selling, and we're going to pay you more money. But eventually, because we're setting the target pays at different job levels across this targeted line, at a certain point, the market is not going to be paying more money for more volume. So total annual earnings will increase, but it tend to flatten out even as the volume is increasing. And so you can actually see, for a sales representative plan, this labor market line is actually broken into the classic jobs: territory reps, senior sales representative, account managers, senior account manager, and global account manager. And each of those boxes is the width, so that means that the territory rep has more pay at risk, and the global account manager has less pay at risk. And that kind of describes the range of those earning opportunities. And that's what the labor market, if you look at the survey data, actually suggests. So not producer line, sales representative line. So now we have different target pay levels that we need to back the formulas into. Okay, so let's revisit the question of total target compensation. So we're going to be talking about the orange and green and blue, but we'll also maybe visit a little bit with some of these other components too. So notice that it's made up, what a salesperson earns is made up of many components. They have sales expense they're normally being reimbursed for. They have benefits, hopefully the same as all other employees at the company, a salary, a target incentive amount, an upside earning amount, some extra money for contests and spiffs. Yes, those are valuable, particularly for doing things new for the first time. And then recognition, which kind of describes what's important to us in a national sales meeting or at a president's club. These recognition events, they don't have a lot of monetary value, but they have a lot of cultural value and a lot of psychic intrinsic value to the salesperson. So all of that kind of gets us to the discussion about the total stack of things that are available. That line going across is that on-target earnings or target total cash compensation. And so this is a complete picture of what is being offered. So when you're doing sales compensation design, you're usually, what's the salary going to be, what's the target incentive, and what's the upside opportunity. So that's our sales representative discussion, and we're going to stay with that. So we're going to set aside producers. And you might ask a question, well, how do I find out what to pay a producer? Your trade association. These pay plans seldom change. Whereas sales representative plans, 90% of all companies make changes to their sales representative compensation plans on an annual basis. But multi-level marketers, traders, that compensation program, producers will seldom change. Okay, so let's take a look at some of our building block concepts. And remember, we're only doing a really quick drive-by on them. And what we're really asking you to do is make a mental checklist. Oh my goodness, I got to make sure I set up the pay mix correctly. I got to make sure I set up the leverage correctly. And make sure I got to select the measures correctly. So those are all by job. So each job, while they all share the same principles, each job gets its own compensation program. Okay. So pay mix reflects the job's degree of individual influence. So the more the sales rep is convincing the customer to purchase, that's called degree of persuasion, the lower the base salary portion of the total target compensation. Seldom does it go below 50-50, and it doesn't ever get more shallow than 90-10. So somewhere between 50-50 and 90-10. And the most popular one, say for account manager job, would be about 65-35, 65 in base, 35 in target incentive. But 60-40, 70-30, those are kind of in the zip code, kind of close to the numbers that are most commonly used for account managers. However, I went my global account manager, might be closer to a 75-25 or an 80-20. Then the upside. So this is where we have already shared this math with you, but let me revisit it again, and let's look at the middle column again. So the target incentive is 100,000. I have a split, 70% base, 30% in target incentive, times 3. Add that to the 70 gives me the 160. And you can see then that's the range of earnings. The low performers will get 0. The average performers will get 100. And the outstanding performers will get 160. In fact, there will be some people that will earn more than 160, 170, 180, but not a lot more, okay? Leverage upside reflects the job's degree of individual influence in attaining quota and considering benchmarks. Now, we do need to check with the labor market. So this rule 3x uncapped is actually a representation of the labor market. So if your labor market says, after you look at the survey and says, you know, it's not 3x in our industry, it's more like 3.25, or it's maybe closer to 2.75 or 2.5, then you're going to build your formulas based upon what your labor market is doing. So remember, 3x is a starting point. If you don't have survey data, use 3x. It's very, very prevalent. But if you do have survey data and it contradicts the 3x, follow the survey data. Just so we have our vocabulary right, remember the word mix describes the split of the target incentive. The word leverage is a multiplier of the at-risk component, giving you the top number. And upside, which is expressed in a currency, is the currency amount for earning over quota performance. Okay, so just briefly, this is a long set of discussions around where does sales compensation monies come from. Now, you know where it comes from the producers. They're splitting the revenue with the company. If the producer produces a lot, they get a lot of money, the company gets a lot of money. The producer doesn't produce much, the company doesn't get much money, the producer doesn't get much money. But where does the money come from sales representatives? Well, in an odd twist of fate, they're actually funding their own sales compensation program. So remember that 30, the at-risk component? Well, if you have 20 reps, you basically have captured 30,000 20 times, which means you have a budget of about 600,000. It's that $600,000 budget that's being reallocated. The low performers are earning less and the high performers are earning more. Now, it's not a hard formula. Pay programs sometimes will pay out a little bit richer than their target amount. However, the logic is, where does the funding for sales compensation come from? It's not the revenue of the company. Of course, they're paying for the headcount. It really comes with the variable component, really becomes from the participants themselves. And so that's kind of a shocking thing to realize. And it also points out that the cost of the company is not variable. So one of the points is, in a sales representative model, if the average pay is 100,000 and the sales reps perform about 100%, they should, on average, earn 100,000. Some will earn less, some will earn more. If the company performed at 120% of performance, the average pay still should be 100,000. You should have set the quotas anticipating that high quota, that high revenue performance, and vice versa. If you come in at 90% of quota and the market has gotten small on you, your quotas should have reflected that potential shrinkage of revenue, because you're obligated to the labor market in this case, which is a target comp of 100,000. So as uncomfortable as it might seem to our finance friends, sales compensation costs are not variables for sales representatives. It's variable to the person, but not to the company. Meanwhile, the complete opposite is true for producers. Revenues are down, we pay less. Revenues up, we pay more. The cost of sales is completely variable, and it's funded by the revenues of the company directly into the producer and the company splitting the revenue or profit, whatever the measure is they're using. Okay, what about quota distribution? This is another important thing. Remember, the low performers are paying the high performers. So we're expecting, and this is, we survey this all the time and ask companies, what's your target distribution? They're expecting 55 to 65% of their salespeople to exceed quota and 35 to 45% not to exceed quota. The low performers are paying the high performers. Then when the second question is asked, what is the actual distribution? Generally, companies say about 51, 52, 49, 48% of their people exceeded quota and reached quota, and the others did not reach quota. So those percentages are, tends to create more of a normal curve, even though this is the objective. And this is how you should build your formulas, based upon this assumption. Okay, and then of course crediting. There's a whole series of rules about crediting. Who gets credit for the sale? Split credits, for example. Well, One of the things you want to pay attention to is what's called horizontal crediting. Vertical crediting is okay. The boss gets credit for the subordinate sales. But how many people are getting a share of the credit for compensation purposes? Now, if I take the real revenue of the company at 100 million, but the compensable revenue, in other words, how many times people were paid on those on that revenue comes in at 105 or 110, that means I'm funding additional headcount. It's not unusual for that number to be between 108% and 112% of the real revenue. So there's revenue, 100 million, and then there is compensable revenue, 105 to 108. Well, why is that? Well, we have to compensate also the national account manager and the local salesperson, and then we double credit between inside and outside. So there's a number of places where people cooperate in terms of contributing to the persuasion. Their quota reflects that. They're both getting credit for the quota, and it's also in their quota, but then it creates compensable amounts that are greater than the real revenue, okay? So we want to make sure, though, that number is not creeping up to 115%, 120%. If that's happening, then some type of safari must take place to go out and investigate why so many people are getting credited for sales on one order, okay? Now, of course, a simple sales force with one person calling on their customers, not an issue. The larger the sales force, the issue of double crediting and horizontal crediting becomes much more pronounced. Okay, your next step, design successfully. So how do you design a sales compensation program? You sit at your computer, put together a couple spreadsheets, walk it on out and says, here's the plan for next fiscal year. Okay, that's not going to work. All right, so we need to have some methodologies for designing well. Okay, so let's take a look at what they might look like. So as we enter into the design process, let's ask some questions. What's happening with the compensation program? So here's some quick checklist items you can ask yourself. You're certainly not going to have all of these. You may not even have one of them, but use them sort of as a, hey, yeah, that is a problem that we have, and we do need to address it. Like the plans are ineffective. They're not aligned with the strategy. You know, the job roles are not aligned. We've got corrupted jobs. We can't hire the right people. We can't retain people. We are not following the building code's best practices. Weird practices are emerging. Lack of cross-functional leadership buy-in. The product divisions don't believe it. No fact-based decision-making. Everything's anecdotal. You know, with so-and-so went to another company. This is how they were paid. Okay, that's not helpful. All right, or costly and inefficient. We don't have a scalable process for managing the compensation program. We have risk and compliance issues. We also have legal exposure. Sales reps are shadow accounting their paychecks. They don't believe the numbers, so they're spending a couple hours each week to make sure they're getting credit. Limited no transparency how payments are calculated. They can't see the calculation. Got too many jobs, too many roles, too many plans, okay? And then the old late cycle things, comp plans are delivered late communications, dragged out dispute resolution, inefficient use of resources to manage end-to-end comp process. It's kind of thought it was going to manage itself. It won't, okay? So any of those things are happening to you, you know, you got to get in and get those addressed as part of the design process. So who's responsible for the sales compensation program? Well, we like the top bar, cross-functional team. And who's that? Sales leadership, sales operations. We want product management representative, finance. Sitting in, we want IT, and we want to review it with legal. And we also want HR giving us the compensation data from the marketplace and maybe helping provide some design oversight, okay? So you can see we, is our cross-functional team is preferred. The next population that's, according to the survey, said that was sales operations was responsible for sales compensation, and HR was at 17.3. Okay, so you can see there's a variety of other players involved, but we would like to see you running a team effort in designing sales compensation, because a successful sales compensation program has consensus: sales organization, finance, product management, HR. All those folks are in agreement with what the plan is going to look like for the next fiscal year. One of the things I would suggest as part of a design process is inventory of the current plans. This is a great way to do it. A lot of communications float around sales comp, a lot of PowerPoints. Let's get it all into one page, list the jobs along the bottom, along the left-hand side, and then describe the eligibility. You could actually modify that and say it's a 3X or 2X design. And then target compensation levels, Then the mix and leverage, oh yeah, there's our leverage amount, okay, 2x and 3x. And then the performance measures and the weighting of the measures, and then of course the formula mechanic that's being used. And of course the performance measures has its own set of principles, one of those being no more than 3 measures, no measure weighted less than 15%. And those measures are then used to, as the engine, built into the calculation engine to reward. And you can see all the different measures here. That's why we have different compensation programs, because these jobs have different charters, alignment, and therefore we're going to measure them based upon what we're asking them to accomplish. Here's the design process. A lot of words on this page. I'll do the headlines and just point out some of the things. Every year, 90% of all companies review their sales compensation programs for sales representatives. I didn't say producers. A process you would follow would be an assessment phase where you gather all the data, find out what's happening with the current program, do a lot of analysis, get market data. Alignment, we're checking with senior management. What do we want the sales force to do next year? What do we want them to stop doing? What new things do we want them to start doing? What do we want them to improve doing? Then we have a design process, and that's where our committee is going to get together and work through all the elements of each of the jobs. And then there's an implementation window in which we're going to make sure we create collateral, communication material, manager training, all of those pieces then go out to the field. And then ongoing on a regular basis is managing the plan. That's usually done by sales operations, answering questions, making sure that things are being processed correctly. And then administration is usually handled by commission accounting, usually in the finance department. Okay, so design process, assess, align, design, implement. So if you have a sales force, let's say of 100 sales representatives and you have 4 or 5 jobs, how long is this going to take? Maybe 4 to 6 weeks, meeting here, maybe 3 design meetings, assessment phase, 2 to 3 weeks, an alignment 1 week, implementation, writing all the communication material, maybe a couple of weeks to do that too. You get into a large sales organization, you have thousands of sales representatives and maybe dozens, if not hundreds of jobs. This process is going to extend out. You'll probably start it in late August and get it all buttoned up by the middle of December, or if your fiscal year isn't calendar, you're going to need 3 or 4 months of work to get the compensation programs ready for next year. Now, one of the things that some people will say, well, David, why are you taking us through this whole process? Because you need to do it every year. Well, they just want to make a few small changes to some of the plans. Okay, that will create a error, probably, that will then compound another error, and those are known as tweaks. Those are changes that are not contextual. Maybe they're not that big a deal, but trust me, as you start to make little one-off changes, you're going to miss the big picture. And besides, there's an important process here of re-asking the question, what do we want the sales force to do next fiscal year? So we're recommending, even if there is no appetite for any major changes, that you go through this same process. And it will go very quickly and very briefly. But if you have mergers and acquisition, you acquire a new product line, or there's a new product launch, or we got to refocus on profitability, or the coverage model has changed and the segmentation model has changed, we got to march everybody through this process and make sure that we know what the segments are, what the jobs are, what the performance measures are, and then we get market data, and then we build our compensation formulas. And just one comment here, there's frequently sort of a cringing, are you telling me you're going to change the sales reps compensation program? They're not going to like that. Okay, so let me solve that right now. Commit to the money, not to the mechanics. So in your communications, you're committing to the earning opportunities. Those of you reaching quota will be earning around 100,000. Those performing exceptionally will be 160. Now, the goals for this fiscal year are as follows. In fact, the plan document is usually written. The plan becomes effective the first day of the fiscal year, and it terminates the last day of the fiscal year. Okay, so that's going to be, something that you're going to have to take advantage of, because you want an agile workforce, you don't want a rigid workforce, and you do not want to commit to the mechanics. The mechanics, once you do that, it's almost impossible to change them. Commit to the money, and it's almost this is the strategy we're going to do this year, and here are the measures, and you have an equal to, if not better, earning opportunity. You need to test the compensation program. These are in your assessment phase. Is our pay and performance aligned? Okay. The cost of sales, is it where we expect it to be? Are we hitting the quotas? What's the payouts look like? Plan design effectiveness. Did we get the pay mix right? and the pay versus performance relationship. I have a chart to show you that. Did we get our quotas? Did they perform to the that curve, 55 to 65% over? Did the MBOs work if we had them? Did we measure time? What are people spending their time on? Is the job, is the job still making sense? Employee motivation, are they engaged? Are they satisfied? What's your turnover? What's your communication themes? Did you make mid-year changes and why? Do people understand them? And then just overall operation, this is management and administration, sales comp, organization. We want to make sure we have a talented group of people who are helping with administration, communication, and the automation systems. So we're going to be plotting this. For every job, we're going to be plotting what is the target incentive amount, or what was the incentive amount earned, and what is the quota achievement. And in this particular case, all the dots are people, and this is for one job, should have lined up. Now, there are many, many different types of analytics to test sales compensation programs, this being the most prevalent. And this particular design, something's wrong here, whereas the low performers who should be dotted a line along the bottom are actually getting more money than they're supposed to be. And it's also happening to the top performers. And this is actual client data, and really there was some manipulation of the contests and spiffs to take care of the low-end people and sort of give another additional hit for the senior people. And manipulation may have been the right word to use, but some of it was also MBO assessments and things like that. All right, well, that becomes very revealing when you take a look at these types of distribution charts. Another thing that's done during the design process is costing the plan, and this is really an Excel exercise. You have two techniques: individual performance costing. If the pay plan is relatively similar using the same measures, you can take last year's performance and pump it through the new design. And you can create some variables that you can then say, well, how is that going to affect our various employees? Will they earn more money or less money? And is the formula working correctly? Remember, these are done a job at a time. Or if you have a whole new set of measures and you just don't know how they're going to perform at, one of the things we want to do is cost it based upon different types of distribution. Let's say everybody did really well, everybody did kind of average, everybody did kind of poorly. What would be the cost and how might that affect an individual? Okay, so very important. They've set aside a couple of weeks to do this costing work while the designs are wrapping up. Okay, next is building formulas. And again, formulas, there's lots and lots of them, and I recommend you take a look at that book, Compensating the Salesforce. I got 40 different formulas. These are kind of building block formulas. But let me get to the underlying constructs under building formulas, okay? First of all, we frequently use this thing known as a pay curve because it gives us a slope calculation. We divide the y-axis by the x-axis, and that gives us the payout rate. So you can see that we have target incentive monies on the left-hand side, and we have performance along the bottom, and that's basically the calculation for sales compensation formula. So just to make sure you know the words, each of those lines going up is known as a ramp. A threshold is a minimum level of performance. We don't pay before that level, usually not to pay for performance from previous years. You don't pay for persuasion twice. So revenue is continuing. We put that below the threshold. A progressive ramp means that we're increasing the payout rate. Anytime the ramp changes, it's called an inflection point. The upside, those are the currency amounts for above target level performance. So we have excellence in incentive pay and an excellence in performance. And that excellence in performance is really gotten from the distribution of performance. We're looking for the 90th percentile. You could put a cap in, don't recommend it, or regress the payouts if for some reason you can't anticipate mega orders or something like that. We're not a fan of either of those, but those are choices that are available. So let's take a look about how these things are calculated. So here's an example where we have some actual monies, where we have a target incentive of $100,000. And in this example, we're not using a base salary to make the calculation easy. And the excellence is $300,000. That's how much you would make for excellence performance. And we have, based upon territory size, a $2 million territory at target, and an excellence performance on a $2 million territory is $4.5 million. So everybody has the same $2 million territory. Most people will be around $2 million. A few people will be at $4.5 million. So what are those commission rates A and B? I'm willing to pay $300,000 if a $2 million territory produces $4.5 million in sales. And you can see up here that same numbers appearing, and you can see the distribution chart along the lower right-hand side. Now, I need to calculate the formula. So it's pretty easy. You take the target incentive and you divide it by the target volume. There it is, compensation divided by performance times 100 to move the decimal point gives you a 5% commission rate. So really, where does incentive formulas come from? They're actually slope calculations. You back into them. You take the performance, you take the compensation, you divide it by the performance, and that will give you the payout rate. Well, what about the second one? Well, you're traveling from 2 million in sales to 4.5 million, and you're traveling and you're willing to provide another 200,000 of money. That's 100,000 to 300,000. There's 200,000 in there. And you set up that calculation and make that division, and there you are. You have the 8% rate for the performance above sales volume. So what's said to the sales rep? Congratulations, glad you're with us. You'll have a $2 million territory. Your commission rate on all sales up to $2 million is 5%. Anything after that is 8%. And that's what's actually communicated to the sales force. There will be people who will make 300,000, maybe even slightly more based upon this formula if they go past the 4.5 million. So where do incentive rates come from? They're slope calculations. We're taking the compensation and dividing it by the performance. Okay, there's a variety of formula techniques. So we just looked at the commission formula. There are things known as ICRs, which means individual commission rate. Everybody has a different size territory and the same incentive opportunity. You divide it out, they get their own commission rate. There are bonus formulas where you pay a percent of the incentive as a percent of quota is retired. There are step bonuses, and then there's these 3 link designs, hurdles, multipliers, and matrices. And these are considered the power group in sales compensation design. And a hurdle says you can't get the accelerator unless you perform this second task really well. So it links 2 measures together. And multiplier is the same concept. I'm going to pay you a lot on your volume production, but I'll pay you more if on this second measure you do really well, or I'm going to pay you less on that first measure if you do kind of not so well on the second measure. And then the third technique is known as the matrix design. And the matrix design has 2 measures that compete with each other and tells the salesperson, I want you to grow and I want you to be profitable, and you'll get the higher commission rate or bonus formula rate if you do both of those well. Now, there are lots of different formula mechanics. These are some of the more popular ones, and they apply to different situations. And so one of the things that you want to be when you're designing sales compensation programs, you want to have an inventory of all the various formula mechanics that are available to you. All right, number 7, communicate with intent. All right, so you'll hear this over and over again, almost anything having to do with employees. Gee, you got to do a great job with communications. Well, there's no more true than with sales compensation. If you simply send out a document with a formula in it, there is no connection. It's got to be communicated by leadership. It's got to be communicated by region account managers. It's got to be communicated by the first line supervisor. Yeah, that means the sales organization communicates to their people. So we don't send a road show out with sales ops and HR people. We actually have the line management communicate the new plan. This year's fiscal sales compensation program is intended to reward our goals for this year, and we're going to be placing a focus on that. Remember, your incentive opportunity is equal to or greater than last year, and but we're going to have different measures, and then you'll get a chance to see how that might impact your pay. Okay, so when we communicate, we got to check these things off. We have to address these questions. Why are we making the change? What is changing? Okay, how will it work? So we need a little before and after. When will it go into effect? How should I change the way I operate? Will this impact my pay? And so those are, we need to always be able to describe those things. Even if I'm speaking at a very senior leadership and I'm at the national sales meeting talking about the next fiscal year comp program, or I'm communicating one-on-one with one of my subordinates. Okay, so sales leader, let's make sure that they're doing the right thing. They provide unified, consistent message to the sales organization. So we don't have the vice president of sales stand up and describe formulas for each job. That's not their role, okay? Their role is to give the mission statement, the strategic alignment, what's important for next fiscal year. Role-specific training sessions, so we need to make sure that we have the various jobs, people can hear how their plans are going to operate. So we don't want to get everybody in the same auditorium and go, now the account manager job, now that we want to make sure that when we meet at the division level, that we can say to them, at the district level with this first line supervisor, okay, we're going to talk just with the account managers now. There's 4 or 5 of them, describe their plan to them. Now we're going to speak with the territory reps, a separate meeting, we'll describe their plan to them. And then there's one-on-one discussions where the manager meets with each person and says, well, David, you can see the new pay plan this year. It's really a great plan. And there's a couple things that you could do to improve your sales results that will improve your pay levels. And let me point those out to you. A very helpful thing in terms of communication is putting together an incentive calculator. An incentive calculator is an interactive Excel sheet where people can take their real numbers, have them pre-populated, allow them to make changes to see how the payout system would pay them. So again, we're creating these incentive calculators by job title, and then the yellow colored charts are where they can plug their own numbers in, okay? And that actually provides them a chance to see how they're going to earn their earnings, okay? Plan document, okay, so we got a lot of things with a plan document, and just a word of advice, particularly from a legal point of view, make sure you have a completely written plan document, not a throwaway PowerPoint or disaggregated, all spread across a web portal, a sales web portal. We need, for each job, a plan document, 7 to 12 pages long, overview section, eligibility, general terms and conditions, okay, the compensation elements, those are the payout formulas. You might have 2 or 3 of those. Crediting rules, employee changes, person is promoted, they go on leave of absence, they terminate. Quotas, how they're calculated, how they can be adjusted. Quota review board. Commission review board, well, that's our quota commission review board. SPIFs, how they work at the company and how they would participate. Recognition programs, and then definition of the key terms. And then each person would then have their own goal. There would be a separate page describing their sales objectives, their quota, their threshold, their quota, their excellence point. It would also give them a place to sign off that they have received their plan document. That's required in several states in the U.S. and it's also required in multiple countries around the world, signed documents that they've received their plans. And then finally, buy pay data and automation solutions. Now there's a long list in here and I'm just going to click through the pages, but this is pay data. So you can't price sales jobs for sales representatives unless you have survey data. And there are lots of survey data providers. They specialize around industries, and some of them are very large, like some of the HR consulting firms have very large survey organizations collecting lots of information by vertical markets, by various industries, and then also by country. And then we also have various trade associations that are collecting survey data too. So get familiar with and make sure you spend money and buy survey information. Okay, and again, we're not here to read these, but I have, I think, 2 or 3 pages of these, and you can see the company name that's providing the surveys. Many of them will have multiple surveys available and describing compensation pay levels for sales representatives, the different job titles too. Again, some more survey sources. And that would be our 3rd page on it. And so each of these, focus on a population. Let me just take a look at the top one, Radford, part of the Aon organization. They have an outstanding survey for high-tech sellers, okay? And so you get a variety of organizations, and you can call them up and say, this is your industry and this is the population of sellers you have. Do you have a survey that applies to my population? And that way you'll find out. And if they don't, they may be able to recommend one to you if they're not already on this list. And then finally, get some automation help. Now, what does that mean? Most of the time, the administration of sales compensation is done on spreadsheets. Well, that produces a difficult audit trail. It produces transactions where's the audit trail? It frequently is designed by a specific person who knows how it operates. We don't get any modeling capability. We don't get any nice communications to the field that they can drill down and look at their data. So there's a variety of companies that have produced a product just for sales compensation automation. Now they call it a variety of things. Some people call it sales performance management. Others call it ICM, incentive compensation management. But these would be your top providers. that have software solutions. And I would suggest if you have at least 100 sales reps, you definitely should be looking at one of these products. And of course, the prices will vary. And the question is, which one's the best one? They're constantly updating their products. So you would like to get in contact with them, talk to one of their salespeople, give them your plan documents, have them demonstrate to you how they can automate compensating. And that would mean sure that we could do the modeling, the sales rep could see their earnings, generates a check to payroll, generates a transaction list to payroll, and gives us our performance reporting information too. So with that, that was a lot of content, and you're going, whoa, I didn't realize that was there. Or if you did realize, you were like, yeah, I got most of those covered. Okay, so let's summarize again. Get strategic alignment. Where do sales organizations come from? They're aligned. They're connecting the company to the customer population. Segmentation is the skill set, the top skill set of a sales leadership organization to make sure that the sales reps are aligned to the right populations. Clean up the jobs. Use sales compensation principles. Design successfully. Follow the same process. Build a formula. You're doing a slope calculation. You're dividing compensation by performance. Communicate with intent, and then buy data and automate the process. So that's your introduction to sales compensation, and it's a great subject. If it's part of your responsibility and something that you're being asked to contribute to, there's a lot of great education available. If you want to take a look at some classes, you can visit worldatwork.org. They actually have classes on sales compensation design. So thank you for joining us. How sales compensation work, an introduction. And again, if you're new to the subject, I think you'll find it interesting and fascinating. There's a lot of great content. And if you're a person who has a lot of experience in this space, make sure you're keeping your skills up to date and learning the latest practices. And with that, that kind of closes our program. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Ciccelli with the Alexander Group.